Google has a whole arsenal of services for us to use in tandem with our map, and one of them is the Street View service. We can project our map's location to a street view. So next to our map, we can have the street view being shown of the location in our map. So imagine on our map if we had an element at the top of the map that showed us what currently was in street view. Well, to do that, we're going to need a div on top of the map. Now we can either just push this map down by having a div with a relative position, or we can overlay it with a div with an absolute position. And we're going to go with a div with an absolute position because we're going to show how you can overlay elements on a map. So create a div and we'll give it the ID of pip_pano. And that stands for picture in picture, because having the street view panorama at the top of the page is a bit like a picture in picture. So now in our style.css, we'll set the styles for our pip_pano. We'll give it a height of 200 pixels and a width of 100%. And we can see that it bumps down our map. So to change that, we'll add the position to absolute. And we'll make sure to give it a top of 0 and a left 0 as well. And to have a better idea of what it's going to look like, we'll give it a background for now. And our background isn't showing up, and that's because we need to set a z index. And now we can see our pip_pano div. So we don't need to have the background, so we'll get rid of that. So now we'll focus on setting up the panorama with the JavaScript API. So within our library, we'll create a method and we'll call it setPano. In setPano, we'll take an element as well as options. And the element will be what we're projecting the panorama to. So to create a panorama, we'll create a variable for it. And just like we've done before with creating objects, we'll create a new google.maps.panorama. And this panorama takes in the element as well as the options. So in our jQuery UI widget, we'll set up a function for setPano. And rather than passing through the element to the setPano in the map, we'll just pass through a selector, and then using jQuery, we'll get that element. And passing through the jQuery object won't work, so we need to use the array notation to get the HTML element. And this will actually only work for one HTML element since we're just grabbing the array of 0. So if we want it to work with multiple, we'll have to iterate through the selector. So we'll use jQuery's each to iterate through the set of elements. So for each of the elements, we'll fire off this callback function, and then we'll set the pano to the element. And one thing that sticks out to me right now is the use of this in this callback function. So to ensure that it's our library, let's create the self variable. And now we'll set it to self.map. So now we'll go back to Mapster, and we need to change it to Street View Panorama. So now in script.js, we'll call the setPano function. We'll pass through the pip_pano ID, and then a blank object. So we can see that we have our street view right here, but we haven't set the location of our street view. So street view takes in a position object, and that takes a lat and a long. So we'll just copy this lat and long up here, and now you can see that we have the street view set. However, there's no definitive link between these two components. We want to be able to move the pegman on this map and have it move on the panorama. So back in our Mapster library, we can set the link by calling a method on our map, and that's setStreetView. And we can set that to the panorama. So now you can see we have this pegman, and if we move him somewhere random, it'll change it in this panorama right here. So now we've set the link between our street view and our Google map. But our panorama isn't set up to fire off any events. Fortunately, we've written the attach events function, so we can call this _attach events. We can pass through the panorama, and then we can pass through options.events. However, we only want to fire this off if there's events. So let's go back into our script.js and let's set some events. So the first event we can fire off is if the position has changed. And if the position changed, we'll alert changed. So we get changed right off the bat. And if we move on the street, we also get the changed box. So one common feature that people want to do with the street view is set the street view to a certain point of view. So when it loads down, it loads to an angle like this rather than the default angle that's straight ahead. For example, let's put in this different lat and long. Right now we just see this dirt hill, but if we turn it all the way around, we can see the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's a much better point of view than what we saw with that dirt hill. So when we load this map, we want to see this image rather than the default one. So to change that, we can customize the options with the POV object, and that stands for point of view. And the POV object has two properties, heading and pitch. And as you can see, if you don't have the heading and pitch properties, it won't show Street View at all. So don't include POV as a property if you're not going to set the heading and the pitch. So heading and pitch are both based off of 360-degree values. And heading controls whether the Street View image goes left or right. So if we set it to 100, it'll go 100 degrees to the right. And with pitch, if we set it to 50, it'll go 50 degrees up. And we set it to -50, it'll go 50 degrees down. So even if you set this to 360 degrees, you would be exactly where you started. So let's move the heading 200 degrees to the right, and we see the Golden Gate Bridge. So remember to use the point of view property when you're trying to set where your street view is located. And there's even an event we can set from the point of view, and that's called POV changed. And for POV changed, I'm going to log change to the console rather than alerting it because it'll show a lot of boxes if I alert it. So I'm going to move this up, and now I'm going to check it in the console. And we can see that we had changed alert many times in the console. So there's still a lot of custom events you can fire off for the panorama specifically. You can even fire off when the street is changed, and a street in a panorama is referred to as a link. So we'll change it from POV changed to links changed. And the links will change when we've changed roads, and you'll get multiple links back when you're at an intersection. So we need to pass through back the event arguments and then the actual panorama itself. Because if you remember, in the callback, we pass back the object that we're setting the events on. And in this case, it's extremely helpful because we wouldn't have access to the panorama otherwise. So when the links change, we can call panorama.getLinks, and this will return all the current links. And we'll make sure this is getLinks. So now we'll take this guy and we'll drag him onto another spot of the map, and this will change what road he's on, thus changing the links. And we can see that we have this array of objects returned, and if we open them up, we can see that we get 40th Avenue because that's the road that we're currently on. So Google Maps provides us a way to project Street View from one map to another div. And from there we can set the heading and the pitch from the Street View as well, which controls where the Street View is being seen from. And we also can fire off events from Street View as well.